your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Beneath the Surface. Cole Mitchell had always been a man who understood the value of patience. At 34, he'd built his reputation as a forensic accountant not through flashy displays, but through methodical persistence that unraveled the most complex financial deceptions. His clients didn't hire him for his charm. They hired him because when Cole Mitchell started digging, he never stopped until he found the truth. The Mitchell family home in suburban Denver radiated the kind of picture-perfect holiday warmth that belonged on Christmas cards. Amy Mitchell, his wife of 6 years, had spent weeks orchestrating every detail of their annual Christmas party. She moved through their living room like a conductor, adjusting garland and repositioning ornaments with the precision of someone for whom appearances meant everything. "Cole, can you help Luke with his shirt?" Amy called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that particular edge that had become increasingly familiar over the past year. "The guest will be here soon, and I need him looking presentable." Cole found his 3-year-old son, Luke, sitting on his bedroom floor, struggling with the buttons on his red dress shirt. The boy's skin told the story of his vitiligo, patches of lighter skin that formed an irregular pattern across his face and hands, a condition that had appeared 6 months ago. Cole knelt beside his son, his large hands gentle as he helped with the stubborn buttons. "Daddy, why does Mommy look sad when she looks at me?" Luke's question was delivered with the devastating honesty that only children possessed. Cole's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd noticed it too, the way Amy's expression would shift when she looked at Luke, as if she were seeing something that disappointed her. "Mommy's just tired from getting ready for the party, buddy. You look handsome." But Luke's question stirred something deeper in Cole's mind. Over the past months, he'd observed changes in Amy that his trained eye for detail couldn't ignore. Late-night phone calls she'd take in the bathroom, shopping trips that lasted far longer than they should have, credit card statements with charges she couldn't quite explain. Cole Mitchell didn't believe in coincidences, and his wife's behavior pattern was forming a picture he didn't like. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of their first guests. Cole lifted Luke and carried him downstairs, where Amy was greeting Tom and Rachel Henderson, their neighbors from 3 houses down. Amy's transformation was immediate and complete. Her face brightened with the kind of radiant smile that had first attracted Cole to her at a Denver law firm's holiday party 7 years ago. "Luke, don't you look wonderful?" Rachel exclaimed, though Cole noticed the slight hesitation in her voice when she saw the boy's face clearly. Amy's smile flickered for just a moment. "Yes, well, we're doing our best with everything." Cole filed away the comment, adding it to the growing collection of observations that were painting an increasingly disturbing picture. His wife had always been image-conscious, but her reaction to Luke's condition was revealing something darker underneath her polished exterior. As more guests arrived, Cole found himself in observation mode, a skill that had served him well in his professional life. He watched Amy work the room, noting how she positioned herself so that Luke remained either behind her or at a distance from the more important guests. When their friend Dr. Patricia Wells asked about Luke's condition, Amy's response was clinical and detached. "It's just a cosmetic issue," Amy said, her voice carrying an undertone of irritation. "The doctors say it's not dangerous, but you know how these things can be challenging." Dr. Wells, a pediatrician, frowned slightly. "Amy, vitiligo is actually quite manageable, and many children with the condition live completely normal lives." "Has Luke been struggling with it emotionally?" "Oh, you know kids," Amy replied dismissively, then quickly changed the subject to her recent promotion at the marketing firm where she worked. Cole continued his observations throughout the evening. He noticed Scott Bradley, Amy's colleague from the marketing firm, had arrived later than the other guests. Scott was a man in his early 30s with the kind of practiced charm that made Cole instinctively suspicious. During his work as a forensic accountant, Cole had learned to recognize certain personality types, and Scott Bradley exhibited the smooth confidence of someone who was comfortable with deception. What caught Cole's attention wasn't just Scott's presence, but the subtle communication between him and Amy. The brief touches that lasted a fraction too long. the way they seemed to anticipate each other's movements, the shared glances that carried meanings beyond casual friendship. Cole excused himself from a conversation about holiday travel plans and moved to the kitchen, where he had a clear view of the living room through the breakfast bar opening. From this vantage point, he could observe without being obvious about it. Amy was standing near the Christmas tree with Scott, their conversation appearing casual to anyone not paying close attention. But Cole was always paying attention. He watched as Scott's hand briefly touched Amy's lower back, a gesture intimate enough to confirm what Cole's growing suspicions had already suggested. His phone buzzed with a text message from his business partner, Mike. "How's the party?" "Still coming in Monday to finish the Kellerman audit." Cole typed back quickly. "Party's fine. Yes, Monday is planned. Might have another case starting soon." He hadn't intended the double meaning in his response, but as he watched his wife laugh at something Scott whispered in her ear, Cole realized that his most important investigation was just beginning. Luke appeared at his father's side, tugging on Cole's pants leg. "Daddy, can I have some cookies?" Cole looked down at his son, this brave little boy who faced the world every day with patches of lighter skin that some people found unsettling, including, apparently, his own mother. The protective instinct that had been growing stronger each day crystallized into something harder and more focused. "Of course, buddy. Let's get you those cookies." As they walked toward the dessert table together, Cole's mind was already shifting into the methodical mode that had made him successful in his career. If Amy was having an affair, he would find the evidence. If she was planning to use Luke's condition against him in some way, he would discover that too. And when he found the truth, because he always found the truth, Cole Mitchell would make sure that everyone involved understood exactly what kind of man they had chosen to betray. The Christmas party continued around them, filled with laughter and holiday cheer, but Cole Mitchell was no longer celebrating. He was planning. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The Christmas party had reached its peak when everything unraveled. Cole had spent the evening gathering evidence of what he now knew with certainty was his wife's betrayal, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. Luke had been playing quietly in the corner of the living room, building a small tower with some wooden blocks Amy had set out to keep him occupied. The party guests were engaged in their various conversations, wine glasses in hand, when Luke accidentally knocked over a small side table while chasing a block that had rolled away. The crash wasn't loud, but it was enough to draw attention. A few cookies from the displaced plates scattered across the hardwood floor, and Luke immediately began picking them up, his small hands working quickly as he whispered sorry repeatedly. Amy's reaction was swift and disproportionate. She crossed the room in quick strides, her face flushed with what Cole initially assumed was embarrassment. But what happened next revealed something far darker. "Luke, what is wrong with you?" Amy's voice cut through the party chatter like a blade. Several conversations stopped as guests turned to see what was happening. Cole moved toward them, sensing the situation escalating beyond normal parental correction. "Amy, it's okay. He's just—" "No, it's not okay." Amy's voice rose higher, and she grabbed Luke's arm with enough force to make the boy wince. "I spend all day making everything perfect, and you have to ruin it." Luke's eyes filled with tears, but he continued trying to pick up the scattered cookies. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry." Amy's face contorted with a rage that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than spilled cookies. She reached into the nearby dog food bowl, their golden retriever Max's dinner that had been left in the corner, and grabbed a handful of the dry kibble. "You want to make messes like an animal?" Amy's voice carried a viciousness that made several guests step back in shock. "Vitiligo? You're dirtier than a dog, huh? Get out." She threw the dog food at Luke, the small pellets striking the boy's face and chest as he tried to shield himself with his tiny hands. The room fell into a stunned silence that felt like a physical presence. Luke's terrified cry cut through the silence as he scrambled behind Cole's legs, his small body trembling against his father's protection. The boy's face was streaked with tears, and pieces of dog food were scattered across his red dress shirt. Cole's transformation was immediate and complete. The methodical forensic accountant disappeared, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that everyone had to strain to hear it, but the words carried the weight of absolute authority. Everyone out. Now, the guests needed no further encouragement. They gathered their coats and belongings with the efficiency of people who recognized that they were witnessing something that would forever change the dynamics of the Mitchell family. Dr. Wells paused as if she might say something, but Cole's expression stopped her cold. Scott Bradley was the last to leave, his eyes finding Amy's for a moment that lasted too long. Cole noted the exchange and filed it away with everything else he'd observed that evening. When the door closed behind the final guest, the house fell into a silence that felt heavy with consequence. Amy stood near the Christmas tree, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as if she'd just finished running. Luke remained pressed against Cole's legs, his crying reduced to soft hiccups. Amy. Cole's voice was still quiet, but there was something in it that made his wife take a step back. Go upstairs. Cole, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. Planning this party, try and make everything perfect, and then go upstairs. Now. Amy opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She climbed the stairs without another word, leaving Cole alone with his son. Cole knelt down and gently picked the pieces of dog food from Luke's shirt and hair. The boy's tears had stopped, but his breathing was still shaky with the aftermath of fear. Daddy, why did Mommy throw the doggy food at me? The question hit Cole like a physical blow. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that his mother's cruelty stems from her inability to accept his appearance? How do you tell a child that the person who should love him unconditionally sees him as a source of shame? I don't know, buddy, but it's never going to happen again. Cole carried Luke upstairs to his bedroom, helping him change into his pajamas and reading him 2 extra stories until the boy finally fell asleep. Then Cole went to his home office and closed the door. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of methodical activity. Cole packed 2 suitcases, one for himself and one for Luke. He gathered important documents, birth certificates, passports, medical records, insurance papers. He transferred money from their joint accounts into an account Amy didn't know existed. He composed and sent emails to his business partner and 3 key clients, explaining that he would be out of touch for a few days due to a family emergency. By 4 a.m, everything was ready. Cole loaded the suitcases into his car, then returned for Luke, lifting the sleeping boy gently and carrying him to the car without waking him. Amy never stirred as they left. Cole supposed she was sleeping off the wine and the adrenaline of her performance. Or perhaps she was texting Scott Bradley, sharing details about how her evening had unfolded. Either way, when Amy Mitchell woke up the next morning, she would find herself alone in a house that felt emptier than she could possibly imagine. Cole drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward his brother's cabin in the mountains outside Colorado Springs. Luke slept peacefully in his car's seat, one small hand clutching the stuffed elephant that Cole had grabbed from his son's bed. As the miles passed, Cole's mind wasn't focused on what they were leaving behind. Instead, he was thinking about what came next. Amy had shown him exactly who she was in that moment with the dog food. She had revealed the depths of her cruelty and her capacity for hurting the most innocent person in their lives. Cole Mitchell was a man who understood patience, but he was also a man who understood justice. And justice, he was beginning to realize, was something he would have to create for himself. 3 weeks later, sitting in his brother's cabin while Luke played with wooden trucks on the floor, Cole's phone rang 22 times in a single afternoon. Amy's lawyer's name appeared on the caller ID with each attempt. Cole let every call go to voicemail, but he listened to each message with the careful attention he'd once applied to financial discrepancies in complex audit cases. Amy was painting herself as the victim. She claimed Cole had kidnapped their son. She spoke of reconciliation and family therapy. But Cole Mitchell was no longer interested in Amy's version of the truth. He was interested in creating a new truth, one where people like Amy Mitchell learned that there were consequences for cruelty, especially when that cruelty was directed at innocent children. The investigation into his wife's betrayal could now begin in earnest. Chapter 3. The Foundation of Truth. Cole Mitchell stood at the window of his brother's cabin, watching Luke build snow forts in the yard below. 3 weeks had passed since the Christmas party, and his son was finally beginning to smile again. The boy's nightmares had stopped, and he no longer flinched when someone spoke to him in a raised voice. David Mitchell, Cole's younger brother and a retired military intelligence officer, entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder thick with documents. "Your wife's lawyer called my landline this morning," David said, settling into the chair beside Cole. "Apparently they've run out of ways to reach you directly." Cole accepted the coffee without taking his eyes off Luke. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd pass along the message. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss amicable resolution of custody arrangements." David's tone suggested exactly what he thought of that phrase. Amicable. Cole's laugh was devoid of humor. After what she did to Luke, they want amicable. David opened the folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table. "Speaking of what she did, I think you need to see these." Cole turned from the window and examined the photographs. They showed Amy and Scott Bradley in various locations around Denver, entering a hotel together, sitting close in a restaurant booth, embracing in the parking lot of Amy's office building. David's surveillance skills hadn't diminished since leaving the military. "How long?" Cole asked. "Based on the timestamps and what I've been able to piece together, at least 8 months. Probably longer." David pulled out another set of documents. But the affair isn't the worst part. Cole's attention sharpened. In his experience, when someone said the affair wasn't the worst part, it meant the foundation was about to shift beneath everything he thought he knew. "Scott Bradley isn't just Amy's lover," David continued. "He's also her business partner in a side venture she's been running through a shell company. They've been organizing corporate events and marketing campaigns, using Amy's position at the firm to funnel clients to their private business." Cole studied the financial documents David had obtained. The pattern was clear. Amy had been violating her employment contract and potentially engaging in conflicts of interest. But more importantly, she'd been building a financial foundation that excluded Cole entirely. "She's been planning to leave you for months," David said. "The LLC was established 9 months ago. They've been moving money through it, building up capital. I think the Christmas party incident wasn't an explosion of temper. I think it was calculated to provoke you into leaving." The realization hit Cole like a physical blow. Amy hadn't lost control at the Christmas party. She had orchestrated the entire scenario to create grounds for a divorce that would paint Cole as the unstable parent who abandoned his family. She threw dog food at Luke as part of a plan. Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. "Think about it," David said. "She humiliates Luke publicly, driving you to leave with him. Then she spends 3 weeks building a narrative about how you kidnapped their son and fled. When this goes to court, she'll claim you're unstable and that she was just overwhelmed by the stress of managing Luke's condition alone." Cole walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. Everything made sense now. Amy's increasing detachment from Luke, her reluctance to discuss his vitiligo with doctors, her positioning during the party to keep Luke away from guests. She'd been laying groundwork for months, creating a story where Luke's condition was a burden that drove her husband to dangerous behavior. "There's more," David said quietly. "I did some digging into Scott Bradley's background. He was married before, divorced 2 years ago. His ex-wife filed a restraining order that was later dropped. The divorce settlement included a clause about supervised visitation with their daughter." Cole turned back to his brother. "What kind of clause?" "The kind that suggests Scott Bradley shouldn't be around children unsupervised." The implications crashed over Cole like a wave. Amy wasn't just planning to divorce him and take Luke. She was planning to introduce their son to a man who potentially posed a danger to children. Cole's phone buzzed with another call from Amy's lawyer. This time, he answered. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Patricia Huang from Brennan, Huang and Associates. I represent your wife in this matter." "I know who you are, Ms. Huang. I've been listening to your voicemails." "Then you know how important it is that we resolve this situation quickly. Your wife is beside herself with worry about Luke. She just wants her family back together." Cole's laugh was cold enough to carry through the phone line. Her family. Interesting phrase. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you may have had a disagreement, but taking Luke without Amy's consent constitutes parental kidnapping. We can resolve this amicably, but you need to return with Luke immediately. Tell me, Ms. Huang, in your discussion with Amy about that night, did she mention throwing dog food at a 3-year-old while calling him dirty? The silence on the line stretched long enough for Cole to know that Amy's version of events had omitted certain details. Mr. Mitchell, I think it would be best if we met in person to discuss this situation properly. I agree completely. Let's meet, but not to discuss amicable resolution. Cole's voice carried the precision he used when presenting findings to corporate boards. Let's meet to discuss exactly what kind of woman your client really is and what she's been planning with Scott Bradley. Another silence, shorter this time. I'm not sure what you're referring to. 9 months ago, your client established a shell company with her lover. They've been funneling business away from her employer while building a joint financial foundation. 8 months ago, she began systematically distancing herself from our son's medical care. 3 weeks ago, she emotionally and physically abused a 3-year-old child in front of witnesses as part of a calculated plan to create grounds for a divorce that would paint me as an unstable parent. Cole let those words settle before continuing. So yes, Ms. Huang, let's definitely meet, because I have documentation for all of it, and I think you need to understand exactly what your client hasn't told you about her definition of family. When Cole ended the call, David was looking at him with something approaching admiration. So what's the plan? David asked. Cole picked up the photographs of Amy and Scott, studying them with the same methodical attention he'd once applied to financial fraud cases. But this wasn't about money or corporate malfeasance. This was about a woman who had thrown dog food at his son and called him dirty because of a medical condition. This was personal. Amy Mitchell thinks she's been playing chess while I've been playing checkers, Cole said finally. She's about to learn that I've been playing a different game entirely. Over the next hour, Cole outlined his strategy to David. It was comprehensive, methodical, and utterly ruthless. When he finished, David whistled low. You sure about this path, Cole? Once you start down this road, there's no going back to amicable. Cole looked out the window at Luke, who was now lying on his back in the snow, making angels with his arms and laughing at something only he could see. The boy's vitiligo patches were clearly visible against his winter pale skin, but Luke had stopped trying to hide them. Here, with Cole and David, he felt safe enough to be himself. Amy had her chance for amicable, Cole said. She chose to throw dog food at my son instead. The war was about to begin, and Cole Mitchell intended to win. Chapter 4. Unraveling the Web. Cole's meeting with Amy's lawyer took place in a sterile conference room at Brennan, Huang and Associates, where the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Patricia Huang sat across from Cole with Amy beside her, while Scott Bradley occupied a chair slightly behind Amy, positioning that Cole noted immediately. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia began, thank you for coming in. As I explained over the phone, we're hoping to resolve this situation quickly and in Luke's best interests. Cole opened the briefcase he'd brought and removed a neat stack of documents. I agree completely that we should focus on Luke's best interests. That's exactly why I'm here. Amy shifted in her chair, her eyes darting between Cole and the documents he was arranging on the table. She looked nervous, which told Cole that she suspected he knew more than she'd hoped. First, Cole said, sliding a photograph across the table, let's establish some facts about what actually happened at the Christmas party. The photograph showed Amy grabbing dog food from Max's bowl, her face twisted with rage as Luke cowered behind Cole's legs. David had managed to pull the image from the Hendersons' social media account. Apparently, Tom Henderson had been taking candid shots of the party and captured the moment without realizing its significance. Patricia studied the photograph while Amy's face went pale. Amy, you didn't mention. It looks worse than it was, Amy interrupted quickly. I was just overwhelmed, and Luke had been acting out all evening. Cole is making it seem more dramatic than it actually was. Cole slid another document across the table. This is a statement from Dr. Patricia Wells, who was present at the party. She's a pediatrician, and she's documented exactly what she witnessed that evening, including the exact words Amy used when she threw dog food at our son. Amy's lawyer read the statement, her expression growing increasingly grim. Dr. Wells had been thorough in her documentation, including Amy's comment about Luke being dirtier than a dog and her apparent inability to show appropriate concern for a child with a visible medical condition. There are also statements from 6 other witnesses. Cole continued, producing more documents, all consistent in their description of Amy's behavior that evening. This is all just... Amy started to speak, but Cole cut her off. Now let's talk about why you're really here, Amy. Cole's voice was calm, professional, the same tone he used when presenting audit findings to corporate boards. Because this isn't about Luke's best interests. This is about covering up the life you've been building with Scott Bradley. Scott Bradley spoke for the first time since entering the room. I don't know what you think you know, but Cole turned to face Scott directly, and something in his expression made the other man fall silent. Scott Bradley, age 31, divorced from Jennifer Bradley 2 years ago after she filed a restraining order citing domestic violence concerns. The order was dropped as part of their divorce settlement, which included supervised visitation rights with your daughter Emma. Scott's face went rigid. That's private information that has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with this. Cole produced another set of documents. Because Amy has been planning to introduce you into Luke's life as a stepfather, despite knowing about your history with domestic violence and your restrictions around children. Patricia Huang set down her pen and looked at Amy with undisguised dismay. Amy, you need to tell me right now what Mr. Mitchell is talking about. Amy's composure was cracking visibly. Cole is trying to make everything sound sinister. Scott and I work together, that's all. We're friends. Cole slid a series of photographs across the table. Images of Amy and Scott entering hotels, embracing in restaurant parking lots, walking hand in hand through downtown Denver. Friends, he repeated flatly. The relationship itself isn't the issue, Cole continued. The issue is the planning you've been doing behind it. He produced incorporation documents for Bradley Mitchell Marketing Solutions, a shell company established 9 months ago, designed to funnel business away from Amy's employer and into a joint venture with her lover. Patricia studied the documents with growing alarm. Amy, this could constitute breach of contract with your current employer, possibly grounds for termination and legal action. But that's not the worst part, Cole said, his voice never changing from his professional tone. The worst part is what you were planning to do to Luke. He opened a medical file and spread its contents across the table. Luke's medical records show that Amy has systematically avoided scheduling follow-up appointments with his dermatologist. She's refused to discuss treatment options with his pediatrician. She's declined referrals to support groups for families dealing with vitiligo. Cole pointed to specific entries in the medical records. Dr. Chun noted in Luke's file that the mother seems disengaged and possibly embarrassed by the child's condition. Dr. Wells documented concerns about maternal rejection related to the child's appearance. Amy was now visibly shaking. You're twisting everything. You're making it sound like I don't love my son. I'm not making it sound like anything, Cole replied. I'm presenting documentation of your behavior pattern over the past 8 months, which shows a systematic withdrawal from Luke's care coinciding with the establishment of your business relationship with Scott Bradley. Cole produced one final document, a draft custody proposal that David had found in Amy's email account. This is what you were planning to request in the divorce proceedings. Joint custody with Luke, spending weekends with you and Scott, despite Scott's history with domestic violence and children. The room fell into stunned silence. Patricia Huang was studying the documents with the expression of a lawyer who realized her client had withheld crucial information. Amy was staring at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Scott Bradley looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia said finally, what exactly are you proposing? Cole gathered his documents and returned them to his briefcase with methodical precision. I'm not proposing anything, Ms. Huang. I'm informing you that I will be filing for full custody of Luke with supervised visitation for Amy contingent on her completing parenting classes and psychological evaluation. Amy's head snapped up. You can't do that. He's my son. Cole's expression didn't change. You threw dog food at him and called him dirty because of a medical condition. You've systematically withdrawn from his medical care. You've been planning to introduce a man with a history of domestic violence into his life. Any family court judge will find those facts very interesting. He stood and walked toward the door, then turned back to face the room. But I'm not done yet. Amy, you made a choice 3 weeks ago to prioritize your image over your son's well-being. Scott, you chose to participate in a relationship that put a vulnerable child at risk. Both of you are about to learn that choices have consequences. As Cole left the conference room, he could hear Amy's voice rising in panic behind him, demanding that Patricia do something to stop him. But Cole Mitchell was no longer interested in what Amy demanded. The foundation of their life together had been destroyed the moment she threw dog food at Luke. Now Cole was building something new on the ruins, something where his son would never again have to fear the people who were supposed to love him. The real work was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. 2 months after the conference room meeting, Cole's carefully orchestrated plan began to unfold with the precision of a master clockmaker's mechanism. He had returned to Denver with Luke, but not to the family home. Instead, they had moved into a downtown apartment with better security and proximity to Luke's new daycare, a facility specializing in children with medical conditions where Luke was thriving. Amy had been granted supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on completing court-ordered parenting classes. The psychological evaluation Cole had requested revealed concerning patterns of narcissistic behavior, an inability to accept Luke's vitiligo as anything other than a personal embarrassment. But Cole's true masterstroke wasn't playing out in family court. It was unfolding in the professional and personal lives of Amy and Scott Bradley. Cole sat in his home office, reviewing the latest reports from the private investigator he'd hired. Not David this time, but a woman named Sarah Chun, whose specialty was corporate espionage. Her findings confirmed what Cole had suspected. Amy and Scott's business venture was built on a foundation of ethical violations that would topple at the slightest pressure. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Mike Reeves, his business partner. "Cole, you need to get down to the office. We've got a situation with the Hartman Industries audit." 20 minutes later, Cole was sitting across from Margaret Hartman, CEO of one of Denver's largest marketing firms. Margaret was a woman in her 50s who had built her company through ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for employee misconduct. "Mr. Mitchell," Margaret said, her voice crisp with authority, "Mike tells me you have information about some irregularities involving one of my employees." Cole opened his briefcase and produced a comprehensive dossier. "Amy Mitchell has been using her position at your firm to funnel clients to a side business she operates with Scott Bradley. They've been undercutting your pricing, stealing your proprietary marketing strategies, and using your client relationships to build their own company." Margaret studied the documents with the attention of someone who understood that her company's reputation was being threatened. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 9 months. They've diverted approximately $200,000 in potential revenue from Hartman Industries to their shell company." Cole handed her additional documentation. "But there's more. They've been using company resources, computers, phones, meeting rooms to conduct their private business activities." Margaret's expression grew colder with each revelation. "And you have proof of all this?" Cole nodded. "Financial records, email correspondence, client testimonials, meeting schedules. Everything you need to terminate Amy for cause and potentially pursue legal action for breach of contract and theft of trade secrets." "Why are you bringing this to me, Mr. Mitchell? I understand Amy is your wife." Cole's expression didn't change. Amy chose to prioritize her personal interests over her family responsibilities. "I'm simply ensuring that her choices have appropriate consequences." Margaret gathered the documents and stood. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your thoroughness. Amy Mitchell will be terminated effective immediately and will be pursuing all available legal remedies." As Cole left Margaret's office, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chun. Phase 2 complete. Scott Bradley's ex-wife ready to proceed. Phase 2 involved Jennifer Bradley, Scott's ex-wife, who had been very interested to learn about Scott's relationship with a woman who had custody of a young child. Jennifer had agreed to file a motion to revoke Scott's supervised visitation rights with their daughter, citing his involvement with someone who had documented issues with child welfare. But Cole's most devastating move was yet to come. That evening, Cole received a call from Detective Lisa Rodriguez of the Denver Police Department. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Can you come to the station?" An hour later, Cole sat across from Detective Rodriguez in an interview room at the Denver Police Station. She was a woman in her 40s with the alert eyes of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. "Mr. Mitchell, we've received some information about an incident involving your son. Can you tell me what happened at your Christmas party 3 months ago?" Cole provided a detailed account of that evening, focusing specifically on Amy's behavior toward Luke. He presented the photographs, witness statements, and medical documentation that showed a pattern of emotional abuse. "The reason I'm asking," Detective Rodriguez continued, "is that we received a complaint from Amy Mitchell claiming that you've been engaged in parental alienation and harassment." Cole had expected this move. Amy was getting desperate as her professional and personal life collapsed around her. "Detective, I'd like you to review these additional documents." He handed her Luke's medical record from the past 2 months, showing remarkable improvement in the boy's emotional state under Cole's primary care. He also provided documentation of Amy's missed visitation appointments and her failure to complete the court-ordered parenting classes. "What I find interesting," Detective Rodriguez said after reviewing everything, "is that this complaint comes at the same time Amy Mitchell has been terminated from her job for theft and breach of contract. It also comes after her boyfriend lost custody of his own child due to domestic violence concerns." Cole nodded. It appears that when people face consequences for their choices, they sometimes try to deflect blame onto others. Detective Rodriguez closed the file. "Mr. Mitchell, based on what I'm seeing here, Amy Mitchell's complaint appears to be retaliatory rather than substantive. However, I do want to follow up on the original incident with your son." "I appreciate that, Detective. Luke's welfare should be everyone's primary concern." As Cole left the police station, he felt a grim satisfaction. Amy and Scott had built their relationship on deception and selfishness, prioritizing their desires over the welfare of vulnerable children. Now, they were learning that such choices carried a price. His phone rang as he walked to his car. The caller ID showed Amy's number. "Cole, you have to stop this." Amy's voice was strained with panic. "I lost my job today. Scott's ex-wife is trying to take away his custody. The police came to my apartment asking questions about Luke." Cole got into his car before responding. "Amy, you created this situation when you threw dog food at our son and called him dirty. Everything that's happening now is a direct result of choices you made. But I've been taking the parenting classes. I'm trying to do better. You've missed 3 classes and 2 scheduled visitations with Luke. Your idea of doing better seems to involve filing false police reports." There was a long pause before Amy spoke again, her voice smaller now. "What do you want from me, Cole?" Cole started his car and pulled out of the police station parking lot. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, Amy. You chose Scott Bradley over your family. You chose your image over your son's emotional well-being. You chose cruelty over compassion. Please, Cole, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No, Amy, we can't." Cole's voice was final. "You showed me exactly who you are when you threw dog food at a 3-year-old boy. I believed you." He ended the call and drove home to Luke, who was waiting for him with a book about snow leopards and a smile that had become brighter every day since leaving Amy's house. The trap had sprung perfectly. Now came the final phase, ensuring that neither Amy nor Scott Bradley would ever again be in a position to hurt innocent children. Cole Mitchell was a patient man, but he was also thorough, and he wasn't done yet. Chapter 6: The Network Crumbles. 6 weeks after Amy's termination from Hartman Industries, Cole stood in his apartment kitchen making breakfast for Luke while monitoring the final collapse of his ex-wife's carefully constructed deceptions. The morning news played on the television in the background, but Cole's attention was focused on the laptop screen displaying the latest updates from his network of sources. Sarah Chun had provided her final report the previous evening, and the scope of Amy and Scott's misconduct had exceeded even Cole's expectations. What had started as a simple adultery case had revealed a web of professional violations, financial impropriety, and ethical breaches that stretched across multiple companies and relationships. Luke sat at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a tiger while eating his cereal. The boy's vitiligo patches were still visible, but his confidence had grown remarkably over the past months. He no longer tried to hide his face or hands, and he'd started asking questions about his condition with the natural curiosity of a healthy child. "Daddy," Mrs. Patterson said, "tigers have stripes to help them hide. Do my spots help me hide too?" Cole smiled at his son's question. Mrs. Patterson was Luke's teacher at his new daycare, a woman who specialized in helping children with visible differences develop strong self-images. "Your spots make you unique, buddy. They're part of what makes you special." Luke considered this seriously while adding orange stripes to his tiger. "I like being special." Cole's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Detective Rodriguez. He answered while continuing to pack Luke's lunch. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We've completed our review of the incident at your Christmas party, and we'll be filing charges against Amy Mitchell for child abuse." Cole's hand paused over Luke's sandwich. "What kind of charges?" "Misdemeanor child abuse and emotional endangerment. It's not a felony, but it will be on her record, and it supports your custody case significantly." After ending the call, Cole reflected on how completely Amy's world had unraveled. The criminal charges were just the latest in a series of consequences that had followed the systematic exposure of her true character. Hartman Industries had not only terminated Amy, but had also filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages for breach of contract and theft of trade secrets. The case would likely drag on for months, but the financial impact was already crushing Amy's ability to maintain her previous lifestyle. Scott Bradley had lost his own job when his employer discovered his involvement in the side business that had cost Hartman Industries clients and revenue. His ex-wife's successful motion to revoke his visitation rights with their daughter had been based partly on his association with someone under investigation for child abuse. But Cole's most devastating move had involved something Amy probably didn't even realize yet: the systematic destruction of her professional reputation throughout Denver's marketing community. Sarah Chun had methodically contacted key figures in Denver's business network, providing documentation of Amy's ethical violations to potential future employers. The marketing industry in Denver was smaller than most people realized, and word traveled quickly about professionals who couldn't be trusted. Amy would find it nearly impossible to find employment in her chosen field, at least in Denver. She would have to relocate, start over in a new city where her reputation hadn't preceded her, and rebuild her career from the bottom. Cole's laptop chimed with an encrypted message from David, who had been monitoring Amy and Scott's communications through methods Cole preferred not to know about. "Amy filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Scott moved back to Phoenix last week. Apparently his family has connections there that might help him find work. Relationship appears to be over." Cole wasn't surprised. Relationships built on deception and selfishness rarely survived genuine pressure. Amy and Scott had been united by their shared willingness to prioritize their desires over their responsibilities to others. When those desires became liabilities instead of benefits, the foundation of their connection had crumbled. His phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed his lawyer, Robert Kim. "Cole, I have good news. The family court judge has granted your petition for full custody. Amy's supervised visitation will continue, but only if she completes the psychological evaluation and parenting classes she's been avoiding." "What about the criminal charges?" "They'll actually help our case if Amy ever tries to modify the custody arrangement. A conviction for child abuse, even a misdemeanor, will be very difficult for her to overcome in family court." After ending the call, Cole sat down across from Luke and watched his son carefully color inside the lines of his tiger drawing. The boy was humming softly to himself, completely absorbed in his artistic work. "Luke, do you remember living at the old house with Mommy?" Luke looked up from his coloring, his expression thoughtful. "A little bit, but I like our new house better. It's not so loud." Cole realized that Luke was referring to the constant tension that had filled their previous home. Amy's frustration with his condition, her arguments with Cole about his medical care, the stress that had permeated every interaction. "Are you happy here, buddy?" Luke nodded emphatically. "I like Mrs. Patterson, and I like my new friends. And Tommy has spots too, but his are different colors." Tommy was another child at Luke's daycare who had a different form of vitiligo. The two boys had become fast friends, bonding over their shared experience of looking different from other children. Cole's laptop chimed again with another message from Sarah Chun. Final report attached. Recommend terminating surveillance. Targets no longer pose credible threat. Cole opened Sarah's final report and reviewed the comprehensive documentation of how completely Amy and Scott's plans had collapsed. Their business venture had been exposed and shut down. Their professional reputations had been destroyed. Their relationship had ended acrimoniously when the stress of external pressure revealed the selfishness that had always been at its core. Most importantly, neither of them was now in a position to harm Luke or any other children. Amy's criminal record and psychological evaluation would prevent her from gaining unsupervised access to Luke, while Scott's loss of custody of his own daughter had effectively ended his involvement in situations involving children. Cole closed the laptop and looked around their apartment. It wasn't as large as their previous house, but it was filled with something their old home had never possessed: peace. Luke was thriving in an environment where his condition was accepted rather than hidden, where his needs were prioritized rather than ignored. "Daddy, will you help me color the tiger's face?" Cole moved his chair closer to Luke's and picked up a yellow crayon. "Of course, buddy. What color should we make his eyes?" "Green," Luke said decisively. "Like yours." As they worked on the tiger together, Cole reflected on the patience and methodology that had brought them to this point. Amy had chosen cruelty and deception, prioritizing her image and desires over her responsibility to protect and nurture her child. She had believed that Cole would simply accept her choices and adapt to her vision of their family's future. Instead, she had learned that Cole Mitchell was not a man who accepted cruelty toward innocent children. He was a man who understood that true strength came from protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. The war was essentially over. Amy and Scott had been routed completely, their capacity for future harm neutralized through the systematic exposure of their true characters. But Cole wasn't finished yet. There was one final lesson he intended to teach, one that would ensure Amy never forgot the consequences of throwing dog food at a 3-year-old boy and calling him dirty. Some lessons Cole had learned needed to be permanent. Chapter 7. The Final Lesson. 8 months after the Christmas party incident, Cole stood in the courtroom where Amy's criminal trial was reaching its conclusion. She sat at the defendant's table with a public defender, having been unable to afford private counsel after losing her job and declaring bankruptcy. The confident, image-conscious woman who had orchestrated elaborate Christmas parties was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated and isolated. Luke wasn't present for the trial. Cole had ensured his son was spending the day with David at a children's museum, far from the courthouse drama. But Luke's impact on the proceedings was unmistakable. The prosecutor had built her case around protecting vulnerable children from emotional abuse, using Luke's situation to illustrate the lasting damage such treatment could cause. Dr. Patricia Wells testified about what she had witnessed at the Christmas party, her professional expertise lending weight to the prosecution's argument that Amy's behavior constituted a serious form of child abuse. The photographs David had obtained told the story more powerfully than words ever could. When the judge announced the guilty verdict on charges of misdemeanor child abuse and emotional endangerment, Amy's shoulders sagged in defeat. The sentence included probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a permanent notation on her criminal record that would affect her employment prospects indefinitely. But Cole's presence in the courtroom wasn't about witnessing Amy's legal consequences. He was there to deliver his final message personally. After the trial concluded, Cole approached Amy outside the courthouse. She was alone. Scott Bradley had disappeared from her life months ago, and her relationship with her own family had deteriorated under the stress of public shame. "Hello, Amy." She turned to face him, and Cole was struck by how much she had changed. The woman who had once prided herself on perfect appearance now looked worn down by months of stress and financial pressure. "Cole." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I suppose you're satisfied now." Cole studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or understanding of what she had done to Luke. What he saw instead was self-pity and resentment. Even now, Amy saw herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the author of her own destruction. Amy, do you understand why you're here? She gestured toward the courthouse. Because you destroyed my life over one moment of poor judgment. Because you couldn't forgive one mistake. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. After everything that had happened, the loss of her job, the end of her relationship, the bankruptcy, the criminal conviction, Amy still didn't understand what she had done wrong. One mistake, Cole repeated. Is that what you call throwing dog food at a 3-year-old child and calling him dirty because of a medical condition? I was overwhelmed. I was trying to manage everything perfectly, and Luke chose that moment too. Luke chose to be a 3-year-old child, Cole interrupted. You chose to emotionally abuse him in front of a room full of people. Amy's composure finally cracked. You've taken everything from me. My job, my home, my future. All because I lost my temper for 5 minutes. Cole watched her dispassionately. This was the woman he had once loved, the woman he had married and planned to build a life with. But that person had been an illusion, a carefully constructed image that had hidden the capacity for cruelty toward innocent children. Amy, you didn't lose your temper. You revealed who you really are. Cole's voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. Everything that's happened to you since that night has been a consequence of your own choices. You chose to have an affair with Scott Bradley. You chose to establish a business built on deception and theft. You chose to withdraw from Luke's medical care because his condition embarrassed you. And you chose to abuse a child rather than examine your own character. I never meant. You meant every word you said to Luke that night. You meant it when you called him dirty. You meant it when you threw dog food at him. And you spent the last 8 months feeling sorry for yourself instead of taking responsibility for the harm you caused. Amy's eyes filled with tears, but Cole felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse for hurting Luke. They were tears of self-pity for facing consequences. What do you want from me, Cole? I've lost everything. Isn't that enough? Cole considered her question seriously. What did he want from Amy Mitchell? What would constitute appropriate justice for a woman who had emotionally abused a 3-year-old child because his medical condition threatened her perfect image? I want you to understand something, Amy. Luke is thriving now. He's happy, confident, and secure. He no longer flinches when people speak to him. He no longer tries to hide his face or hands. He's learning that his vitiligo makes him unique rather than shameful. Cole paused, letting those words sink in. All of that happened after he was removed from your influence. Think about what that tells you about the kind of mother you were. Amy's tears came harder now, but Cole continued relentlessly. I want you to understand that you will never have unsupervised access to Luke again. Your criminal conviction, your psychological evaluation, and your continued refusal to accept responsibility for your actions have made that impossible. Luke will grow up knowing that his father protected him from someone who saw his medical condition as a source of shame. Cole stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Amy could hear. And I want you to understand that if you ever attempt to contact Luke without court supervision, if you ever try to undermine the progress he's made, if you ever again prioritize your image over his welfare, I will make everything you've experienced over the past 8 months look like a minor inconvenience. Amy stepped backward, apparently seeing something in Cole's expression that frightened her. Cole, I'm his mother. No, Amy, you're the woman who threw dog food at him. That's how Luke will remember you, and that's how everyone who matters will remember you. You made that choice, and now you get to live with it forever. Cole turned and walked away, leaving Amy standing alone outside the courthouse where her criminal conviction had just become official. He didn't look back. As he drove home to Luke, Cole reflected on the systematic dismantling of Amy and Scott's lives. Both had learned that their choices carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment of decision. Amy would carry her criminal record forever, affecting her employment prospects, her housing options, and her ability to form new relationships. Scott had lost his own child and been forced to relocate to another state, his professional reputation in ruins. But more importantly, Luke was safe. He would grow up in an environment where his vitiligo was accepted as part of what made him special rather than something to hide. He would never again have to fear emotional abuse from the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. When Cole arrived home, he found Luke in the living room with David, building an elaborate castle out of blocks. The boy looked up with a smile that lit up his entire face. "Daddy, Uncle David and I built a castle with a moat and everything." Cole knelt down and examined their architectural achievement. "It's magnificent, buddy. Did you leave room for the tiger we colored yesterday?" Luke nodded enthusiastically. "He's the castle guardian. He protects everyone inside from bad people." Cole met David's eyes over Luke's head, and his brother nodded slightly. The message was clear. Luke felt safe, protected, and valued. The boy who had once hidden behind Cole's legs in terror was now confidently building castles and assigning roles to protective tigers. "That's perfect, Luke. Tigers are very good at protecting the people they care about." As they played together, Cole felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or justice. It was the satisfaction of a father who had protected his child from harm, who had created a safe space for a little boy to grow and thrive without fear. Amy Mitchell had made her choices, and she would live with the consequences forever. But Luke would grow up free from her influence, surrounded by people who valued his uniqueness rather than hiding it. The war was over, and Cole Mitchell had won completely. Chapter 8: Consequences and Revelations. 1 year after the Christmas party incident, Cole received an unexpected phone call that would provide the final chapter in Amy and Scott's downfall. He was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Detective Maria Santos with the Phoenix Police Department. I'm calling about Scott Bradley." Cole's attention sharpened immediately. Scott had relocated to Phoenix after losing his job in Denver, presumably to start over with his family's help. "What about him, Detective?" "Mr. Bradley was arrested yesterday on charges of domestic violence against his new girlfriend. During our investigation, we discovered some information that connects to your situation in Denver." Cole set down his pen and focused entirely on the conversation. "What kind of information?" "Mr. Bradley's girlfriend, Stephanie Walsh, has a 5-year-old daughter with a visible birthmark. According to Ms. Walsh, Mr. Bradley became increasingly agitated about the child's appearance, making comments about how it reflected poorly on their family image. The domestic violence incident occurred when Ms. Walsh refused to consider cosmetic surgery for her daughter." Cole felt a chill of recognition. Scott's pattern was becoming clear. He was attracted to women with children who had visible differences, then used those differences as leverage for emotional manipulation and control. "Detective, I think you need to know about Scott's relationship with my ex-wife and how he influenced her treatment of my son." Over the next hour, Cole provided Detective Santos with comprehensive documentation of Scott's involvement in Amy's abuse of Luke. He explained how Scott had encouraged Amy's shame about Luke's vitiligo, using the boy's condition as a wedge to separate Amy from her family and bind her more closely to him. "Mr. Mitchell, this information suggests a pattern of behavior that goes beyond simple domestic violence. We're going to investigate whether Mr. Bradley has been deliberately targeting women with children who have visible differences." After ending the call, Cole immediately contacted Detective Rodriguez in Denver to share the new information. The implications were staggering. If Scott had been systematically seeking out vulnerable families to exploit, there might be other victims who had suffered similar abuse. 2 weeks later, Detective Rodriguez called with an update that exceeded Cole's worst fears. "Cole, we've identified at least 3 other cases where Scott Bradley formed relationships with women who had children with visible medical conditions. In each case, he used the children's conditions to manipulate the mothers, often encouraging them to seek corrective treatments or to limit the children's social interactions." Cole sat in stunned silence as Detective Rodriguez continued. "One case involved a single mother whose daughter has a facial birthmark. Scott convinced the mother that the child would never be accepted socially unless she underwent expensive cosmetic surgery. Another case involved a boy with severe scarring from a childhood accident. Scott persuaded the mother to homeschool the child to avoid embarrassing situations. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Scott Bradley was a predator who specifically targeted families where children's differences could be weaponized for psychological control." "What's happening with the criminal case?" Cole asked. Phoenix PD is building a comprehensive case. They're looking at charges beyond simple domestic violence, possibly criminal child endangerment and psychological abuse. And they want to coordinate with us regarding his activities in Denver. That evening, Cole sat with Luke in their living room, reading together before bedtime. Luke had chosen a book about animals with unique markings, and he was particularly fascinated by a chapter about zebras and their individual stripe patterns. Daddy, it says every zebra has different stripes, just like fingerprints. That's right, buddy. Each zebra is completely unique. Luke studied the illustrations thoughtfully. I'm unique like the zebras, aren't I? Because of my spots. Cole pulled his son closer. You're unique in many ways, Luke. Your vitiligo is just one of the things that makes you special. Luke nodded seriously, then asked a question that stopped Cole's heart. Daddy, why did that man Scott want Mommy to make me hide my spots? Cole had hoped Luke was too young to have understood the dynamics that had been playing out around him, but children were more perceptive than adults often realized. What do you remember about Scott, buddy? Luke's expression grew troubled. He used to tell Mommy that I should wear long sleeves all the time. And he said maybe I shouldn't go to parties because people might stare. Mommy got sadder after he started saying those things. Cole felt a surge of rage at Scott Bradley that was almost overwhelming. The man hadn't just encouraged Amy's abuse of Luke. He had been directly coaching her to hide and shame their son. Luke, Scott was wrong about everything he said. There's nothing about you that needs to be hidden. Your spots are beautiful, and anyone who doesn't think so isn't worth worrying about. Luke smiled and returned his attention to the zebra book. I like being unique like the zebras. Later that evening, after Luke was asleep, Cole called David to share the new revelations about Scott's pattern of behavior. So he was specifically targeting families with children who had visible differences, David said after Cole finished explaining. That's not just opportunistic abuse, that's systematic predation. The worst part is how long it might have continued if Amy hadn't finally pushed things too far at the Christmas party, Cole replied. If she had been more subtle about her abuse, if she hadn't created such a public scene, Scott might have succeeded in completely isolating Luke from normal social development. David was quiet for a moment before responding. Cole, you need to understand something. You didn't just protect Luke from Amy's abuse. You probably saved other children from Scott Bradley's systematic manipulation. Cole hadn't considered that perspective, but David was right. By exposing Amy and Scott's relationship so thoroughly, by documenting their patterns of behavior so comprehensively, Cole had created a trail of evidence that was now being used to protect other vulnerable children. There's something else, Cole said. Detective Santos wants me to testify in the Phoenix case. Apparently, my documentation of Scott's behavior pattern with Luke is crucial to establishing his predatory methods. Are you going to do it? Cole thought about Stephanie Walsh's 5-year-old daughter, about the boy with facial scarring who had been homeschooled to avoid embarrassment, about all the children who might encounter Scott Bradley in the future. Yes, he said finally. If my testimony can help protect other children from what Luke went through, then I have an obligation to provide it. 3 months later, Cole sat in a Phoenix courtroom, providing detailed testimony about Scott Bradley's systematic manipulation of Amy's shame regarding Luke's vitiligo. The prosecutor used Cole's documentation to establish a clear pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable families. Scott Bradley was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by supervised probation with restrictions on contact with families who had children with medical conditions or visible differences. After the trial, Stephanie Walsh approached Cole outside the courthouse. She was a woman in her 30s who looked exhausted but relieved. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't documented Scott's behavior so thoroughly, we might never have been able to prove what he was doing to my daughter. Cole shook her hand. How is she doing? Better, every day. She's back in regular school. She's making friends, and she's proud of her birthmark now instead of ashamed of it. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. Scott almost convinced me that I was a bad mother for not protecting her from other people's reactions. You helped me understand that the problem was never with Emma. It was with him. As Cole flew back to Denver, He reflected on the full scope of what had begun with a Christmas party and a handful of dog food thrown at a 3-year-old boy. Amy's moment of cruelty had revealed a network of predatory behavior that had affected multiple families across multiple states. But more importantly, it had led to Luke's liberation from an environment where his uniqueness was seen as a source of shame rather than pride. When Cole arrived home, he found Luke in the kitchen with David, making cookies shaped like zebras and tigers. Luke's face was dusted with flour, and he was laughing at something his uncle had said. "Daddy, we made striped cookies." Cole examined the cookies, noting that Luke had carefully added white icing spots to some of the zebras, creating his own unique pattern. "These are perfect, buddy. Just like you." Luke beamed with pride, completely confident in his own worth and uniqueness. The boy who had once hidden behind Cole's legs in terror was now creating art that celebrated differences rather than hiding them. Amy Mitchell and Scott Bradley had chosen cruelty and manipulation, believing they could reshape reality to match their selfish desires. Instead, they had learned that some choices carried consequences that extended far beyond their intended scope. But Luke had learned something different, that he was valued exactly as he was, that his differences made him special rather than shameful, and that there were people in the world who would fight to protect his right to be himself. That, Cole realized, was the most important lesson of all. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 2 years after the Christmas party incident, Cole stood in the auditorium of Luke's elementary school, watching his son participate in a presentation about what makes us special. Luke, now 5 years old, stood confidently at the front of the classroom, wearing a bright blue shirt that highlighted rather than hid his vitiligo patches. "My name is Luke Mitchell," his son said clearly, "and I have vitiligo, which means I have patches of lighter skin. My daddy says it makes me unique, like how every zebra has different stripes." Luke held up a drawing he'd made of himself standing next to a zebra, both of them covered in distinctive patterns. The other children in the audience listened with the natural acceptance that made childhood friendships possible. "Some people used to think my spots were bad, but my daddy taught me they're actually special. Now I have friends who think they're cool, and I'm not scared to show them anymore." Cole felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with Luke's performance and everything to do with the confidence his son had developed. The boy who had once been terrorized for his appearance now stood before his peers celebrating what made him different. After the presentation, Cole spoke with Mrs. Patterson, Luke's teacher, who had become an important advocate for children with visible differences. "Luke has made remarkable progress," she said. "When he first started here, he was shy and withdrawn. Now, he's one of our most outgoing students. He's even started a friendship group for kids who look different from others." Cole watched Luke interact with his classmates, noting how naturally he moved among them. The boy had developed the kind of social confidence that came from knowing he was valued for who he was rather than hidden because of how he looked. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know how much your support has meant to our family. Luke talks about your class constantly." She smiled. "Luke is special, Mr. Mitchell, but I think you already know that." As they walked to the car after school, Luke chattered excitedly about his presentation and the positive reactions from his classmates. "Daddy, Tommy said my spots look like a map of secret islands. And Sarah asked if I could teach her how to draw zebras like mine." Cole helped Luke into his car seat, marveling at how completely his son's world had changed. The child who had once been reduced to tears by his mother's cruelty now created friendships based on celebrating rather than hiding differences. "I'm proud of you, buddy. You did a great job today. Daddy, can we visit Uncle David this weekend? I want to show him my zebra drawing." "Of course. Uncle David loves your artwork." As they drove home, Cole's phone rang with a call from Detective Rodriguez. He answered using the car's hands-free system. "Cole, I wanted to update you on the Amy situation. She's completed her probation successfully, but she's filed a motion requesting expanded visitation with Luke." Cole felt Luke's attention shift to the conversation. His son was old enough now to understand references to his mother, though Amy remained a distant figure in his daily life. "What kind of expansion is she requesting?" "Overnight visits and reduced supervision. Her lawyer argues that she's completed all court-ordered counseling and has maintained stable employment for 6 months. Cole considered this development. Amy had indeed met the technical requirements of her probation, but meeting requirements wasn't the same as demonstrating genuine change. What's your recommendation, detective? Honestly, I think the current arrangement is working well for Luke. The supervised visits twice a month seem appropriate given the history. But ultimately, it's up to the family court judge. After ending the call, Cole glanced at Luke in the rearview mirror. His son was looking out the window, his expression thoughtful. "Daddy, was that about Mommy?" Cole had always been honest with Luke about his mother's situation, explaining in age-appropriate terms that focused on Luke's safety and well-being. "Yes, buddy. Mommy wants to spend more time with you." Luke considered this quietly before responding. "Do I have to see her more if I don't want to?" The question broke Cole's heart. A 5-year-old child shouldn't have to make decisions about protecting himself from a parent. But Luke's instincts about Amy remained strong. "You never have to do anything that makes you feel unsafe or scared, Luke. That's a promise." Luke nodded seriously. "I like our visits now because Mrs. Johnson is there. Mommy is nicer when other people are watching." Cole realized that Luke had developed a sophisticated understanding of his mother's behavior patterns. Even at 5 years old, he recognized that Amy's treatment of him changed based on whether witnesses were present. That evening, after Luke was asleep, Cole called his lawyer Robert Kim to discuss Amy's motion for expanded visitation. "Robert, what are the chances the judge will grant her request?" "Lower than you might think. Luke is old enough now that his preferences will carry significant weight with the court. If he expresses reluctance about overnight visits, the judge will take that seriously." "What about Amy's completion of the counseling requirements?" Robert's tone was professionally skeptical. Completing court-ordered counseling and demonstrating genuine behavioral change are two different things. The fact that Luke still requires supervised visits to feel safe around his mother speaks volumes about whether she's truly addressed the underlying issues. Cole hung up feeling confident that Luke's current stability wouldn't be disrupted by premature expansion of Amy's access. But the call reminded him that Amy remained a persistent threat to Luke's emotional security. 3 weeks later, Cole sat in the same family court where Luke's custody had been decided 2 years earlier. This time, Luke was old enough to speak with the judge privately about his preferences. Amy looked different than she had during the criminal trial. She'd found work as an administrative assistant in a small marketing firm, a significant step down from her previous position, but stable employment nonetheless. She'd also completed the required counseling, though Cole noted that she still exhibited the same self-focused behavior patterns that had characterized their marriage. When Luke emerged from his private meeting with Judge Harrison, he walked directly to Cole's side, his body language clearly indicating where his loyalties lay. Judge Harrison returned to the bench and delivered her ruling with the kind of measured authority that left no room for appeal. After reviewing all submissions and speaking with Luke privately, this court finds that the current visitation arrangement serves the child's best interests. Luke has expressed clear preferences about maintaining the current level of supervision, and his emotional stability under the current arrangement is evident. Amy's face fell, but Judge Harrison continued. "Ms. Mitchell, while you have met the technical requirements of your probation, the court notes that Luke's request for continued supervision suggests that trust has not been fully rebuilt. The current arrangement will remain in place, with review in 1 year." As they left the courthouse, Cole felt the satisfaction of a final victory. Amy would continue to have limited, supervised access to Luke, but she would never again be in a position to inflict the kind of emotional damage she had caused at the Christmas party. That evening, Cole and Luke celebrated with ice cream and a movie night. Luke had chosen a documentary about African wildlife, and he provided running commentary about the various animals and their unique markings. "Daddy, look, those giraffes all have different spot patterns too." Cole watched his son's face light up with excitement about animals that shared his experience of having distinctive markings. Luke had learned to see his vitiligo as something that connected him to the natural world rather than something that isolated him from it. "You're right, buddy. Nature loves creating unique patterns." As Luke fell asleep that night, curled up against Cole's side during the movie, Cole reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The Christmas party incident had revealed the worst aspects of human nature: cruelty, selfishness, and the willingness to harm innocent children for personal gain. But had also revealed something more important: that love, patience, and unwavering protection could help a wounded child rebuild his confidence and self-worth. Amy Mitchell had thrown dog food at her son and called him dirty because his appearance didn't match her vision of perfection. Scott Bradley had encouraged that cruelty because it served his predatory purposes. Both had learned that such choices carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment of decision. But Luke had learned something different. He had learned that he was loved unconditionally, that his uniqueness was valued rather than hidden, and that there were people in the world who would fight to protect his right to be himself. Cole Mitchell looked down at his sleeping son, this brave, confident boy who now celebrated his differences rather than hiding them, and knew that every choice he had made in pursuit of justice had been worth it. The war was over, and the right side had won completely. In the end, love had proven stronger than cruelty, truth had triumphed over deception, and a father's protection had given his son the foundation to build a life free from shame. That was the only victory that truly mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.